Immigration in Canada is a hot topic right now, with more people moving here than ever. But did you know there's one province that more people are leaving than ever? That's right, it's Ontario. More people are now choosing to leave Ontario than any other province. And quite honestly, that doesn't come as a surprise, especially when you consider the high cost of living, the high cost of real estate, and the expected stagnant wage growth in that province. But what I think might surprise you is where those people are going. But before we get into it, my name is Nolan Matthias, and if you want the latest Canadian real estate news, this is the place for you. So do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and hit the like button so more people like you can see this video. And if you're watching this channel and you just looked down and you went, oh wait, I'm not subscribed, but I thought I subscribed to Nolan's channel already. Well, you probably did, but it was probably the other one, which is now focused on general wealth building and financial information. This channel is now the one dedicated to Canadian real estate news. So if you're interested in that, make sure you click the subscribe button here. And hey, if you're interested in making more money or getting more money, maybe go check out the other channel too. But without further ado, let's get into the topic at hand here. Let's talk about what's going on in Ontario and why everybody is leaving Ontario. Stats Canada updated a whole bunch of its immigration and migration data here, population data, I guess you could say, in the last couple of days. And the information is quite interesting because what is becoming clear is that more and more people are leaving Ontario for obvious reasons. And what's interesting is where they're going, why they're going there, and specifically why they're leaving Ontario to begin with. So I want to jump you into the headlines and I want to show you pretty much everything that's going on. Here we go. Migrants are driving population surge and Alberta is the fastest growing province. But what this article doesn't point out is what the next one does, and that is that Alberta has set a Canadian record for annual net inter-provincial population growth. So in other words, Alberta saw more people move from other provinces than any other province at any other time in history, which is insane. And guess what? The majority, the bulk of the people who are now moving to Alberta are coming from guess what? Guess what or guess where? What's the right way to say that? Anyways, they're coming from Ontario. And this shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, late last year, we saw stories like this. We saw them again in March of this year. Ontario sees largest Q3 interprovincial migration loss in more than 40 years. And this has very much been the story of Ontario for the last couple of years. Now, don't get me wrong. There's times in the past where Ontario has done very well from an interprovincial migration standpoint. But over the last couple of years, what you can see is that a pretty significant amount of people are leaving for places like Ontario, places like Alberta to the tune of 37,000 people, and places like BC to the tune of 20,000 people. But the key thing here is that it seems to be an exodus that was spurred on from the beginning of the pandemic. People looking for better lifestyles, cheaper lifestyles in places that maybe aren't nicer, but maybe have a better prospect for living a more quality life. And if you take a look at the numbers are actually staggering. More people have left Ontario for Alberta than any other time since 1980. And this hasn't always been true. There are years where people leave Alberta. There are years where people leave other provinces and go to Ontario. But the story is quickly becoming Ontario, Toronto is not somewhere where people can afford to live. It's not that they don't want to live there. It just seems that they can't afford to live there. And subsequently, over the last 10 years, we saw this increase in interprovincial migration into the province. And now we're seeing the gap towards people leaving increase again and again and again. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for this. Obviously, the first is the high cost of living, high real estate costs. But there's also the traffic congestion that comes with living in one of the most densely populated areas in Canada. Then there's the air pollution, the harsh winters, limited green space. Thank God they got that whole green space thing figured out, or that green belt thing figured out over the last couple of weeks. And then there's the safety concerns that come along with living in bigger and bigger cities. And here's the big thing that's coming up, is the employment prospects. It seems as though the prospects of making more money in Ontario are gradually going away, especially as some of the biggest companies in the country, like Rogers and Shaw, and companies like RBC start to lay people off. And the majority of those job losses are going to come in the areas where there's the majority of the population. And with more people becoming available to work, that is an indication that at some point there could be stagnant wages. And when you're making about the same money or less money and housing costs are going up so substantially, well, you probably want to get the heck out of there as fast as possible, especially when you start to look at the average incomes in other provinces. Take a look at Alberta, where most of these people are going, for example. Average household income, about $80,000. Compare that to Ontario, $80,000. Now, that might not seem like a big deal until you start to look at the average house prices in those areas. Average house price in Ontario, $832,000. Average house price in Alberta, $439,000. So if you own a home in Alberta, it's going to cost you about half as much as owning one in Ontario, but you're going to make about the same amount of money. And if you owned a home in Ontario and you saw that major spike, that major run up in prices, and you sell, well, you have a pretty big down payment available for a significantly less expensive home in Alberta. In fact, you can probably buy a similar house or a significantly bigger house for significantly less than what it's going to cost you in Ontario. And that seems to be the bigger story here, is that people are looking for quality of life. And that seems to be associated with how far your dollar will go. And if housing is substantially cheaper and everything else is about the same price, well, that makes your dollar go significantly farther. Now, what's really interesting here is UBS came out with their global real estate bubble index, their new one, last week as well. And this is where it gets really interesting, because last year, Toronto was the #1 biggest bubble according to UBS. Now, if you look at Toronto, it is #7 in the world, which means it has come down substantially. And as you can see, it's no longer in the red zone for being a bubble anymore. It's now in the yellow zone for being a bubble, which means it's still probably a little bit overpriced, but it's not in blow up territory anymore. The reason for this is really simple. One, the 15% real price reduction that they saw relative to inflation, but the other is the fact that there's less demand for housing in Ontario because people are looking to move to other provinces. People are seeing that there are other options out there. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. Winter in Canada is winter in Canada. It doesn't matter which winter you take part in. They're all bad unless maybe you live in BC. So therefore, if you're going to live in one province versus another, but you can make the same amount of money and have a significantly lower cost of living, well, it makes sense that the demand is shifting to other provinces. And that is clearly what is happening in Alberta. The demand is shifting here because of the high quality of life combined with the pretty reasonable income relative to other places and the low cost of living. And the reality here is that this won't change until there's balance in the market. So Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba prices come up, Toronto prices come down, and it becomes more appealing once again to live in Ontario. But as of right now, migration, international migration, is pretty much spread out across the country. But it's clear that people who have lived here, people who have landed here, people who've grown up here, are seeing greener pastures outside of those Ontario borders. Now, what does that mean for you as a consumer? Well, if you're in Ontario and you're looking to buy, if you're looking to move to greener pastures, well, I can't tell you when will be the right time to do it. What I can tell you is if you own a home, you want to make sure that you look into porting your mortgage, make sure that you talk to the bank or the lender that you're dealing with, and make sure that if you are going to move and you're going to need a mortgage to purchase the new property in Alberta, that your employer has either agreed that you can work remotely or you found employment in the province where you're looking to move. Now, I firmly believe that Ontario, Toronto specifically, is now an international city. It will rise again. People will want to live there more than anywhere else in Canada. Maybe not more than Vancouver, but as of right now, it's just the cost of living has become too expensive. People want to get out. Oh, and if you want to know more about what's going on in Canada's real estate market and the mortgage market, make sure you check out this video right here.